Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Khym.
And I'm Bob Schutz.
We're two Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration. If you've been blessed by our podcast, please prayerfully consider partnering with us on Patreon. Your support will help cover the cost to produce the podcast, but will also give you access to exclusive content like monthly reflections and special live stream teachings. Go to patreon.com/restore the glory and join the mission of experiencing the restoration of our God-given glory. Hey, Bob. Good to see you again. We are continuing on in our series here on same-sex attraction, and we have another guest with us, and I'm very excited to have this guest with us, and it's somebody that you've known and have history with. And so, Bob, I'd love for you to introduce our guest, Christopher. So, Bob, take it away.
Yeah, this is a good day that we are able to have this conversation, and it's been a long time coming. And Christopher Dowling, I met him years ago. He was one of the students at Texas A&M University, and a whole group of them migrated over to our conferences. And as I got to know Christopher, just developed a real bond of love and affection for him. He was with us for a number of conferences. I'll let him tell some of the story, but and then I won't interfere with the story. But then as he entered in more explicitly into same-sex relationship, more of a community with the gay community, it created just a disconnection in our relationship. And so this is part of the healing process for us with each other. We've had conversation before. But Christopher, how about you tell your story?
Yeah, absolutely.
How we met. And
I grew up small town Texas and always very involved in my faith. And a friend of mine, when working at Catholic summer camp, it initially got me really involved in the John Paul II Healing Center and theology of the body. And funny enough, it's a compliment that Bob thought I went to Texas A&M, because anybody that knows me knows I didn't go, but I was such a fan of Texas A&M, and I was such that a lot of people ended up thinking I went because I was like an Aggie, and anybody that knows Texas A&M Aggies, fun. They're so proud and they would love it. So I went to the University of Dallas, but a lot of
that's right.
and I live in Austin, Texas, and so Texas A&M is in the Diocese of Austin, and I lived in Texas, and the John Paul II Healing Center really put deep roots in Austin through Texas A&M and the Diocese of Austin, and a lot of the priests in the Diocese of Austin. That ultimately is actually why I moved to Austin. So I could go through a little bit of my life story, but basically through the John Paul II Healing Center, I was in Catholic seminary at one point to be a Franciscan priest. So shout out to Jake, who went to Steubenville. I was with the TOR Franciscans for a year. Discerned out, and then in all of that time was really involved with the John Paul II Healing Center. When I left seminary, was trying to figure out where I would move. I even thought about Tallahassee, Florida, but ultimately landed in Austin because of the community there. And then in the last 7 years in Austin, is to Bob's point, I came out and identified and do identify as gay, and began dating, pursuing romantic relationships, and I'm currently in a romantic relationship with a man, which very much put me at odds with Catholic Church teaching on sexuality, and has caused a lot of grief, because there's a big rift in my relationships with all of the people that I, dearly loved at the John Paul II Healing Center, and that whole family that they were for me. And so when Bob reached out almost a year ago, I was on another podcast sort of talking about my grief and my pain. And Jake, you could talk about the different camps, right? Like we were sort of talking beside each other, and after losing touch, and Bob heard the podcast episode that I was on, Bob reached out to me and said, could we have a conversation together? And really admire you, Bob, for reaching out to me, and remember that conversation distinctly.
Christopher, tell us a little bit more. What got you involved with the JP2? Like, why did you seek them out? Like, you were going to the University of Dallas, and were you studying theology, or were you, because you're in the seminary? Like, what are some of those holes there?
Yeah, I was studying economics, but I joked because I was so involved in campus ministry that really campus ministry was really my major, right? It was like all the retreats and praise and worship groups and summer camp and everything. I loved it, right? I absolutely soaked up everything I could in terms of what the church had to offer for ministry and missionary life. Before college, I was a missionary with Net Ministries. I did a gap year before college, and then I went to college, and then that's when I encountered the theology of the body. Was, I think, maybe junior year of college, through my friend also a Christopher, who's very rooted in the John Paul II Healing Center community with Dr. Bob. And
Cool.
and then that was in college, so midway through college. And then from there got really involved with for example, the Theology of the Body Institute with Christopher West and Theology of the Body Evangelization team in Irving. I worked full time. So I think the first thing I would just lead with is sort of, even though I'm living the quote unquote gay lifestyle and I'm in disagreement with the church, like my journey to get here was very, very much involved in these parts of the church and these communities that, and oftentimes people might assume otherwise, right? Like that I wasn't that involved, or that I represent this camp way over here of these sort of this extreme. It's very tempting to get hyperbolic, like talking hyperboles about the two camps. And I think I kind of stand in the middle somewhat.
We've been talking. Sorry, Bob. I'm all excited now. So,
keep going.
We've been talking about the two camps, and Christopher, you're referencing, in case our listeners don't know what we're talking about, and Bob and I's first episode of this series, which we sent to Christopher to have him listen to, just to get oriented kind of with what we're talking about. The whole camp concept came up as like, I'm in this camp, and there's all these people in differing camps. So, Christopher, how do you understand the camps so that we can all just make sure we're defining it all the same and on the same page, and especially for our listeners to kind of get a refresher? So maybe there's more than two, but like, how do you see the camps?
In my mind, I get a whiteboard and I want to like, how can I whiteboard this out audibly for folks, right? And
Okay.
I have my marker and you have your marker and Bob has his marker. And if you gave each of us a whiteboard and a marker, we're going to draw it out three ways.
Sure.
But generally speaking, the first concentric circle would be the Catholic Church and the Catholic Church teaching on sexuality, and within the Catechism of homosexual acts being intrinsically disordered and not acting out. And adherence to the Catholic Church would be not being in romantic relationships, not acting out in any kind of physical expression of homosexual, that would be, but even within that, so that's, I guess that would be Catholic Church teaching. And then I am on the sort of fully outside of that, right? Like I'm in a same-sex relationship. I am engaged to be married. And it will very much not be a sacramental marriage within the Catholic Church. It would be within another denomination of Christianity. But even there's a middle ground, and that's the area that I really would also want to focus on, is not bringing people over to me. But I think there are still a lot of people that identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual that want to adhere to the Catholic Church teaching, that are also not seeking to have their sexual orientation, their sexual desires healed and transformed in such a way that they're sort of quote unquote straight, right? And that's where we get this talk around conversion therapy. And so I would say those are the three camps I would explain. And just to reiterate, my goal in this podcast isn't to bring people over to me, but really to explain that there are still a lot of hurting people that have felt discrimination in the church that desire to be orthodox. And I almost want to speak on behalf of them and their pain as well.
Did you shift camps along your own story? Would you say that did your camp placement evolve?
A lot of folks have that experience where they go from, Orthodox Catholicism to being on the fringe, sort of like identifying as LGBTQ, but not being in a relationship, and then fully out to where I am. I made a pretty clean jump from one to the other in 2018.
Okay. So you didn't, there's the circle where I adhere to the church's teachings, and let me know if any of this language doesn't resonate with you, but I adhere to the church's teaching. I lived a celibate lifestyle. Don't know if that would resonate. And then there's the church's teaching is there. So we're talking about how people live that. And then there's I don't live the church's teaching, but I still follow Jesus. And then there's I don't care about what anybody says. I don't even follow Jesus. Like, I'm throwing out another camp even there just to put a whole spectrum. And I'm hearing you say, you're still a believer in Jesus. That's right? Because I know we prayed right before. So it's not like that third camp is, I think, what I know more people in that one, if that makes sense.
The camp meaning,
and I don't care. I'm atheist. Like the atheist organized religion is bad, and I'm also gay. So that camp is, I know people there, probably more than I do the other camps. Maybe it's just where I live, or I don't know. But anyway, so you're in that camp that said, I'm a follower of Jesus, but I don't adhere to the church's teaching. So when you said, I'm going to get married in another denomination,
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that, am I following?
Yeah. And I really appreciate that we're sort of, again, these are all metaphors that fall short, right? We're in relationships and trying to love each other. But yeah, this camp that I am in, I think a lot of people, Jake, your experience is probably most experience at the Catholic Church. If there is someone who quote unquote identifies as gay, quote unquote lives the gay lifestyle, it means XYZ, that they're, not involved in the church, that they want to take down the church, whatever. And that's not how I feel at all.
Yeah.
Could you tell a little bit about your story, just kind of starting childhood background, awareness of same-sex attraction, how that developed in your consciousness, and then the journey, just we'll lead you along the way, but just kind of some of the journey starting young.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I grew up in small town Texas in as stable as a family as you could often get in American modern times on the outside, right? Both my parents are still married and do love each other, but there was also a lot of tumultuous, experiences as a child, plenty of sort of trauma, whether it was through my parents or, being exposed to pornography young and various things like that. And so that was mixed in with the fact that I always fundamentally felt like I was attracted to the same sex. And when I look back, I could see the purity and the innocence, but so much of the purity and the innocence for me was so shrouded in also the trauma that my only experience of same-sex attraction was in trauma. And I'm going to stop myself right there because the argument could be, and again, Bob, you and I love each other and care for each other, but we might be in disagreement, is the same-sex attraction developed because of those traumas. And that's a valid argument, and that's where we spent the 3 first episodes. But I'm representing the one to say there was an innocence there that I wasn't able to tease out until much later, actually through a lot of healing, to see that there was this there. Now, I'm not here to say that I was born with it. I'm not going to make a scientific argument. I think that gets a little too in the weeds for an hour-long discussion. But to say that it's something that from the age of 18 to 28, I did absolutely everything there was that the church offered, I believe. With God's grace, trying to cooperate with the sacramental life and organizations like Dr. Bob's and all kinds of things to try to reintegrate that, to try to receive healing in that area. And I've received a tremendous amount of healing, and I could credit a lot of that to these ministries that you all are involved in so many areas of my life in this trauma. But that innocent desire to love and be loved by another man has actually grown in purity and stayed as the years progress. Not that it went away to the point where I felt more empowered to live a celibate life or more able to be in a relationship with a woman. Certainly, Bob, I was involved for so long. If I could have been in a relationship with a woman, and I dated the same girl off and on over a 12-year period, and we were both heartbroken over that, I would have. If I could have been celibate and been a priest or in consecrated life, I was with the TOR Franciscans near Steubenville. I lived with the vocations community for priestly vocations in the Diocese of Austin, right? I was very close with that community. And then finally, after all of those years of realizing neither of those vocations were something that was viable, I came to this point of grief and this sort of end to say, what if, who am I to disagree with, 2,000, 1,500 years of church teaching? But at 28, I finally decided to make that leap. And so 5 years ago, that's the choice that I made. So hopefully that answers your question. I'll pause and see if you want to tease out any more of that. But
yeah, if you could just draw out kind of the experience in that tension as you're, like in those 10 years, what you're experiencing in those 10 years that feels like a dissonance inside of your heart that ends up in that place of decision making of saying, well, this is being true to myself by stepping out here.
Bob, can I pause that question?
Yeah.
So we might cut this out, but I feel like something that's might be going on for the listener right now that I don't know if we want to draw out right now in this conversation is the amount of potential interpretations that are going on. And so I'll just say one, and Bob, you're just setting him up so you can blast him. That's what I know. You're not doing that, Bob, because I know you. That's not how you operate. But I can imagine all the reading into everything. And I feel like if we're actually going to help people navigate a conversation, at least we could acknowledge that occurs, Because if somebody tries to replicate this and they go, wow, that went fairly well with all of them, I'm going to go do that. But I feel like there's a fairly level high sensitivity that we're trying to navigate with, and we've prepped all of this, blah, blah, blah. So maybe I'm distracting from the conversation, but it feels like there's so much going on that could be under the surface that if we don't acknowledge any of it, I feel like it would be disingenuine. If that even makes sense. How does that sound?
I could say my experience. I think Bob, I know you. I think that this is the way that Bob approaches folks when they're working through brokenness or talking about it. You're curious and investigative of what I'm going through on a really deep level. That's how I experience, not quite the blasting, but it's your profession to sort of tease these things out and then try to get to a different place. That's how I experience it.
Yeah. Let's make sense of what's happening here in your heart is what I'm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would imagine that if we had because we're going to talk about grief in a second. And I think what I'm trying to do is use this live conversation to point out what maybe other people experience and maybe why it goes sideways. Is either one of you at any point could go, well, I know what you're really getting at.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start speaking or reacting out of this belief you have in your heart about what you're quote unquote really getting at. And that's never actually talked about, but people start reacting out of that space. And so, Bob, it would be possible for somebody to listen to that question. And if they didn't know you or thought very ill of you, they could get mad at you. And you're like, whoa, why are you getting irritated with me? I'm genuinely just, I'm asking, no, you're not. I know what you're actually doing. Do you follow what I'm getting at? Like it's the relational dynamic. And so, Christopher, it's cool to hear that you know Bob well enough to know that, you're going, I don't feel ill will from him as he asks these questions. He's curious.
But I have friends that will listen to this episode and get triggered.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. That's exactly what I'm trying to get at on both sides.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There'll be people, Christopher, who listen to you and go, well, I know what you're really trying to say. And I think I just want to set that up with, I think so much of the pain happens in those pockets where we don't actually talk about what's actually going on in my heart. Because let's say, pretend for a moment, Christopher, that you felt Bob was manipulating you to get to an end. He's setting you up to blast you. Let's say that was the case. You guys talking about that would probably be the most healing thing that could happen, because Bob would say, I genuinely don't have that desire in mind. And then you might go, yeah, I know you do. Yeah. And then Bob could say, I know I don't. Now we have to address that before we can even continue the conversation. You follow what I'm getting at?
Yeah, the point that I left off was sort of 2018, sort of this critical point of coming out. And Bob, I think you had caught my Facebook post. And I'm wondering if we talk around that and your pain and my pain and go chronologically, it might be easier for the listener to sort of follow our journeys and stories and then tease that out. But yeah, it's a valid question to investigate. It's just whether or not we have the time.
Yeah, it's to me, where the question comes from is, what is the experience internally of going through TOB and going through JP2 Healing Center and having that internal dissonance that 2018 would come in that point of decision? Because, from my standpoint, that's what, I would think the people who know and love you from it, that's kind of I don't know what happened here. I don't know what happened in your heart here. And so we can skip that, but I'm just saying that's where the question is coming from. It's like there feels like there's this discontinuity if we just jump to that moment.
And Bob, I think the question is awesome. Christopher, I think I'm hearing you say, I know Bob's intention. I'm used to him. So there's nothing bothering me about the question. My thought is what you guys are doing right now is not the norm.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of stuff that's already getting kicked up in people's hearts and minds because of distrust, ultimately.
Yeah.
I don't trust that you actually give a rip about me. You're setting me up to shoot me down. And Bob, I know that's not who you are. I know that's not who you are.
And I know too, yeah.
Right. So Christopher, you know that, and that's why sorry, I feel like I'm distracting, but it seems really important because you can listen to this episode and go, oh, well, I'm just going to go talk to my niece or nephew who's gay and just go, yeah, I'm just going to do what Bob and Christopher did. Easy peasy, right? And No, not easy peasy. There's a lot of layers going on that are being sensitively navigated so that this conversation could even occur. And it's both of you are doing it. It's not one of you. Both of you are choosing charity, to assume the best of the other, that there isn't malicious intent. I just want to acknowledge all of that because it's so stinking important if we're ever going to have a conversation about this stuff.
Yeah. I think if it's okay for us to try that, where we go back to that moment, Bob, because that's kind of where I left off is 2018. And sort of you and I fill in the gaps of where we've been and where we felt since then. And then I wonder if some of my question might be asked, because I do have comments on it and some of my experiences. But to Jake's point, as we build more trust and sort of couch this in the grief that we're experiencing, maybe then we can touch some of these points.
Bob, how's that feel to you?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm even wondering whether some of this conversation would be good for the podcast.
Because Taylor will cherry pick it, I'm sure. Yeah,
it's real. I mean,
and I'm sitting here. I'm not mediating, but I'm listening for what's under the surface.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
because I'm going. Anyway, so sorry for the interruption, and we'll do with whatever we do with that section, but it feels important. So,
okay.
So 2018, I'm 28 years old. Give or take a year, right? Not exactly perfect here. Is that point where I sort of raised the white flag to say I have tried my best to sort of reintegrate, a more tongue-in-cheek sort of political way of saying this is pray the gay away. I know that's like a phrase that's turned around. I know that's a jarring phrase, but I bring that in because we are talking about camps and we are talking about a lot of pain. But like that was the moment when I said, okay, I'm going to take a chance. Jump out of the Catholic Church teaching, and was devastated that my whole world would fall apart and that I would lose everything that I've ever known. And I didn't do this lightly. I was in treatment for 6 weeks. I did inpatient psychological treatment. I'll add on that between the ages of 25 and 30, I spent $50,000 of my own money as a young professional working in the church, spending some inheritance that my family was not pleased that I was doing, to work with the John Paul II Healing Center, to work with Dr. Bob, to work with a personal therapist, to work with the Theology of the Body Institute, to do all of that. And the final stretch of that was when I went to 6 weeks of inpatient psychological treatment. It wasn't Catholic. It wasn't anti-Catholic. The therapists there weren't these liberal therapists that tried to get me to embrace my sexuality. It was something I decided to do very prayerfully and internally. And then after that point, I allied myself with progressives in the church. And I know that a lot of listeners here know there are plenty of camps within the church that are progressive, that are gay affirming, that we would potentially call heretical or in disagreement. That is the shift that I made. It wasn't, I'm going to throw the church away. It wasn't, I'm leaving. It's okay. What else might the church still have for me? But I was very grieved that I would lose so many people that I loved. And that's where I kind of want to put it to Bob of what was your experience? I know I made a Facebook post. I'm curious if you all had conversations about me. I mean, Bob and I are really catching up on the fallout from the decision that I made to come out in 2018.
Yeah, somebody sent it to me, and there was a level of shock of like, I think that's first part of the grieving process is shock.
Yeah.
And then I went into prayer, just prayer for you, prayer for your family, prayer for just for understanding, and prayer for discernment of should I reach out. And I knew at that point that reaching out was not the right time to reach out. It was like there was nothing. Probably I could have said, I love you, Christopher, and I disagree with you, but I didn't want to. I didn't feel like there was any from the Holy Spirit. I didn't feel like there was any real good to come in that moment to communicate. So it was just a kind of a waiting and pausing, and then I began to hear from others of your close friends, people that really care about you and their pain. And wow. I read or heard, I don't know, I don't have Facebook, so I didn't see anything on Facebook, but I heard maybe it was your description of how accepting your family was and how loving your family was and how free you felt and how joyful you felt. And so there was this, tear in my heart, I guess is the best way to describe it. Until, again, we didn't communicate with each other until this last year. And, that was healing, just to have that conversation. For me, there's a couple things. One is it's not just a temporal reality, but an eternal reality, and there's a real concern at that point. I think my biggest, deepest pain was concern for you, for your eternal welfare.
And still, right, as we sit across looking at each other on our Zoom, I feel that grief that you all feel. We're holding so much grief. The tear in your heart was in juxtaposition to me experiencing what I would call my greatest healing and joy. And that tear that you experience in the rift of my joy cannot be understated and takes years and so much effort to try to come together. And I think about my family and my fiance's family, my fiance's family is very much more where you're at, Bob, of really, really struggling. And we're really trying to figure out how can we, in desperation, trusting God, salvage these relationships where the grief process is like that shock, sadness, anger. Am I going to face eternal damnation for these choices? Loved ones wondering the same thing for me. And then going through the grief process of like, how do we come to a place of acceptance and try to be in relationship, knowing that there may be nothing I can do, Bob, to change your perspective and the way that I see that the work that you all are doing in your best possible way, I see as potentially harmful to people. And that grieves me. But likewise, you're experiencing grief of the decisions that I make and how I speak might lead people away and how I might be I just don't want to understate the grief. And our temptation to try to resolve that grief is where the fights come from, right? The anger and the sadness are the early stages of grief, and the loving acceptance is sort of the last stage of grief of like, the loss doesn't go away, we can't fix it, but how do we live carrying this grief? I mean, hopefully you could hear it in my voice and I feel it in my heart. And I think that the battles that we have are trying to resolve the grief, trying to just get through it, trying to bypass it. And Bob, I'm fascinated to hear that you wanted to reach out but didn't, because my own experience, and this is for the listeners, Bob and I are hashing this out as like distant family. Like, I'm like, why did nobody reach out? Right? Like, where was everybody when I made this decision? And here you are expressing your grief and saying like, I carried this and I just, not that you didn't know when, but I just want to reverence that for any listener that has somebody that is living the quote unquote gay lifestyle, that's a real thing of like, what do I say? I don't reach out to all of my Catholic friends and try to brag to them about all these joys in my life because my joys cause them grief. And one last thing I'll say, because I can go on and on. One of the challenges of my perspective is I am still very happy with all of my friends that are involved in the JP2 Healing Center, or people that adhere to Orthodox Catholicism and practice natural family planning and love all that the church has to offer. It's like I celebrate them and support them because I'm like, this is life-giving to you. This works for you. So this temptation and rash judgment that I'm sort of against all of that, right? So like I catch up with an old friend. I'm like, tell me about your marriage. Tell me about how youth ministry is going. Tell me about your involvement with this or that. Tell me about family life. Tell me about how the parish life is. I mean, you all could see the smile on my face. It brings me joy to see other people's joy, but then the conversation might flip. And then everything in my life, I am walking on eggshells to share because all of my joy will give them grief. But their joy still gives me joy. Bob, your joy, Jake, your joy, all the things that these ministries and the church has done for you still brings me joy. And I just want to point that out, that I hold that joy. I could still hold that, even though I'm in disagreement with much of it for how it turned out for me.
Mm-hmm. That's a part of, I think, the value of what's happening right now. I was actually reflecting on this earlier, and I said, like, what's my position coming into this conversation? And my position coming to the conversation is to learn and reverence. And that's because I am in that camp of, I don't believe that the gay lifestyle is of God. Mm-hmm. So I'm in that adherence to the church teaching camp. And yet when I look at Jesus, he could go to any camp. He went to every camp, and I don't think he compromised who he was, but he went to every camp. So what I appreciate about what's happening is that, Christopher, as you're sharing, I'm learning. And sure, we could get into theological debates, et cetera, but now is not the time, because let's say you and I, Christopher, we don't have the rapport to push that, to whatever. And so I really appreciate what you're saying, Christopher, because it's helping me understand your world.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what Jesus did. He got into everybody's world. It doesn't mean he agreed with everything. And that creates an interesting thing, because we stand in different camps, but where we can be united is in a reverencing of each other and a learning, I want to understand your heart. And so for me, I find what you just said, like, I have not thought of that before. I am grieved when I try to share my joy, or I grieve people when I try to share my joy. And my camp would go, well, I know why. And, we would, and they would go through and they would explain why you're grieved, like, well, it's because you're wrong and you're making bad decisions, right? And all that. And I'm like, now that's not the time. That's not the time for that conversation. The time is to be present to Christopher's experience. It doesn't mean you compromise. Like, I don't feel like I'm compromising my position to genuinely understand where you're coming from. I can do that and still hold something. How's that land with you, Christopher?
I love this conversation of grief, and you all are the professional, with a therapeutic background in grief. But I think Christ is in this. I feel like he's holding all three of our hands. He brings us together in this conversation. And the image is, the bleeding Sacred Heart, like the holding of the tension, the holding of the grief and the suffering. And, I think of Mary Magdalene's grief through the Passion of the Christ, like in that, when she was following, and Mary, and the two models of like Mary Magdalene's grief, which is sort of this wailing and this intensity. And then, the Blessed Mother's grief, which was more sort of quiet and contemplative. And I think those are all of us experience different versions of that. And I would say that both of them stayed in the grief and they didn't ditch the cross. They were through it all. And I think the temptation in sort of ditching the grief, ditching the suffering, the cross is where the fighting comes in, is where let's debate this. Let's try to come to an answer. Let's get to a clear conclusion. And in this 50 minutes, I think we're just going to sit in the grief. And I hope that we have more questions and say, okay, maybe this isn't as simple as I thought. Maybe, and one thing I'm excited, whether we talk about this now or later, is a way that I experience sort of extra grief, and I think causes extra grief for people that are Orthodox Catholics, is the assumptions that are given to my people, quote unquote, the gay community, the gay agenda. I think that the assumptions, I think it goes against what the Catechism says about discrimination. I think it compounds the grief of God's people when there are these generalized assumptions about people like me. And I think I desire to talk about those assumptions and hit those, because I think that we can help work through some of this grief and bring Christ to dwell in the painful parts of these relationships by me saying some of those assumptions, but by those of you saying ways that you've been hurt by the quote unquote gay community or the gay agenda, and dwelling in these pains together without simple answers. And
I don't think what we're attempting to do right now happens very much. So I'm just grateful that we're attempting to do what we're attempting to do, because I'm feeling, and just to state it explicitly, nobody right now has changed their camp position, and yet we're all respectfully talking to each other and trying to love each other. And at the exact same time going, like, Christopher, you would say to me, Jake, I disagree with you. And I would say to you, Christopher, I disagree with you. But what do we do in that? Because one option is, well, I'm never going to talk to you again to get the hell out of my life. You're going to hell, everything's shit, and be gone with you. That's hard to reconcile. Yeah, Bob.
Yeah. And the disagreements, it's not like we're disagreeing about what color, flavor of ice cream we like.
Yeah.
This is central to your life,
Eternal.
Christopher. This is central. Yeah. And this is central to everything that we believe and stand for on both sides, right? I mean, we've all staked our lives on the beliefs that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's not little.
Yeah.
It's not little. And so it's not just we disagree, but the disagreements are so fundamental in the core of who we are that there are a lot of places of agreement, but there are those fundamental places around this topic that makes it really challenging to stay connected, to stay listening, to stay compassionate in that. And, as we talked about in the beginning, of not going back to a defensive response on any of our parts. Like that's the easy thing, is to get defensive and say, whoa, or as you said.
Yeah. It feels like there's a lot of novelty here, right? I hear you, Jake, saying these conversations don't happen. I also, maybe I could take away some of the novelty to say the church throughout its history has always had to deal with the grief of people's eternal damnation and their loss, right? Like the excommunication, living outside church's teaching, and family members have always grieved what they see as family members or loved ones living in mortal sin and potentially losing out on their salvation. And the church has walked with people and had teachings and approaches that has evolved over the ages, whether through Vatican II and how we approach Jewish people and how we approach atheists and secular and all of that stuff. I think because homosexuality is such a politicized issue and there's so much vitriol in our media that we're not able to approach it on both sides, liberal and conservative, with the respect, compassion, sensitivity that we approach somebody who's Protestant or somebody who has rejected the faith or somebody who doesn't come to mass anymore or somebody who's divorced. And there's a lot of emotion going on with me where I feel discriminated against because people aren't able to approach me with the same respect, compassion, sensitivity that they have learned and the church has learned to approach so many other people that they deem living in mortal sin. And so I would say that that's the hope that I have, that not the church would just change its teaching on this, but that people, the church is people, right? Like that the people of the church would be able to work through their grief in a way that they have done with other areas of sin. And I think that means that we have to fight against the generalizations, fight against the politizations, fight against the hyperbolic statements. And to be very frank, you've had two guests on that have preceded me, one of which, who was the guest that we just had on? That you just had on?
AJ.
AJ. AJ has one approach. I have another. And Andy Comiskey has another. I really admire AJ's approach versus sort of Andy's approach. And again, I'm respectfully disagreeing. Listening to Andy's approach was very challenging for me because I felt like there was a lot of misunderstandings and generalizations, whereas AJ's approach was really kind of very personal, speaking on his own experience and his own healing versus talking about the sort of politics of it. And so I just want to point out those two that want to love and respect both, but also respectfully disagree with some of the approaches because I think it adds to sort of the pain and hijacks our ability to dwell in the grief.
Yeah. Could I ask you, as you're entering into this, we had talked earlier, you were sharing about your perception of those catechism quotes that we talked about in the first episode. Do you want to kind of go through there and identify where you resonate and really want to draw out from the catechism and where you disagree and what the disagreements are?
Thank you. Yeah, Catechism 2358. The number of men and women who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies is not negligible. So there's a lot of us. And I know that in the church and out of the church, and we feel like we're in a closet, even in the deepest parts of the Orthodox Church and then coming out. So this inclination, homosexual inclination, which is objectively disordered, constitutes for most of them a trial. Now I'm going to call out the writers of the Catechism infused by the Holy Spirit constitute most of them a trial. I'm going to say if we update the Catechism, that is an understatement a little bit. It constitutes for all of us a trial if we're trying to be in the church. But nonetheless, back to the quote, they must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. I wish they would change should. Maybe it's a mistranslation. It should say must be avoided. I wish that we would talk about discrimination with the intensity that we talk about, not living out the sin. In other words, when you get a little bit further down, or maybe it's earlier, I don't have it in front of me. The Catechism says, under no circumstances must homosexual acts be permitted. That is a very firm statement. But then every sign of unjust discrimination should be avoided. Why can't we talk about that discrimination and that harm in the same firm way? And I'm getting very emotional here. And so if I can just break down some ways that I have experienced discrimination and I've experienced a lack of compassion, respect, and sensitivity. When I very first decided to come out and I was in treatment, there was this very loving Catholic woman that I was very close with throughout the week. And as I was struggling and sort of deciding to finally break with church's teaching, her and I were in very close conversation. And one of the first things she said to me is, you're not like the rest of them though. Like you're so much different than them, right? So already my very first experience of coming out to an Orthodox Catholic was, well, you're so different than all the others. And I wanted to say,
What is them? Does
the
them mean
the
the
gay
community?
culture, the gay community.
Okay.
And I want to say, how many of them do you know? Because frankly, I might have been the only one that she knew. And so there's this temptation. People might be listening and saying, wow, Christopher's so different than all the other gays, the gay culture. And I want to say, okay, listeners, how many other people of them do you know? And if I am the only one that you know, or one of 3 people that you know, and I already break the mold, can you please give me the benefit of the doubt and us the benefit of the doubt that maybe we're not as same, or looped together as you might think. And so what people might often do is, rather than let me change folks' perception of the community, they just label me as the exception so that they could keep the same generalization of the quote unquote gay community. So just some things. I as a member of the LGBT community, I am a passionate member of the LGBT community. I am as gay agenda as they come. I am not anti-church. I am not anti-family. I am pro-Catholic for the people that are experiencing the life-giving experiences of the Catholic Church, right? So I think I would just ask people to really let this conversation, if I'm one of the few gay people that's living in a same-sex relationship, engaged to be married, seeking gay marriage, there's fear that gay marriage is going to destroy the family. Like I would be a groomsman for a Catholic wedding today if a friend invited me, right, to support their Catholic family. So I'm pro-Catholic family in many ways too. So those are just some of the ways that I think I've experienced, a lack of respect, compassion, and sensitivity, is not understanding the nuance of my experience in the gay community.
Christopher, how would you respond to somebody who would say, I'm envisioning someone and because we can be non-antagonistic, I'd love to just, how would you respond if they say, Christopher, that's impossible that you can be pro-Catholic family because you inherently don't believe pro-Catholic family teaching? Like what do you do with that?
So I have a lot of people that are quote unquote liberal, pro-gay, that would say that all of you all are hateful, homophobic, bigoted because you don't affirm my same-sex marriage that's going to happen this fall. And I would say to them the same thing of like, these folks are in grief. They love me dearly. Yeah, we disagree. And I feel like I've been hurt in many ways by them, but that doesn't mean they don't love me. And that doesn't mean that they're hateful. So I would say I'm asking both sides to sort of drop some of these assumptions that like anybody that is not quote unquote same-sex marriage affirming is suddenly hateful and bigoted and homophobic. So I'm sort of pointing out both sides of like,
I see.
Trusting that, are we willing to stand here in the grief? And we haven't talked about the stages of grief, but the first stage of grief that I understand, and there's a couple different methodologies here. The first stage of grief is denial. Christopher's not really gay. He's going to be healed one day. He's going to come back. He's, even the challenge of my eternal, state, like that. There's a lot there of like embracing, like Christopher might go to hell for this, and then that's where the anger and the sadness come in. That's the second sort of, and it's just waves of anger and sadness. There, a lot of the anger is what sells. That's our whole political climate is anger, right? And then there's just this deep sadness. And then after that is the bargaining. Well, maybe we could have both. Maybe I could be an Orthodox Catholic and I can get gay marriage. Maybe the church will change its teaching. Like that, to me, we're sort of bargaining. And the last stage is like, wow, like this hurts. And I have to accept that this hurts. And I don't know if it's going to go away. And I just want to label those. I know it's a very shallow, quick going through them, but the anger and the sadness, I think, is where we struggle with the far left making their arguments and the far right. It's us trying to work through our anger and our sadness of you all are bigoted, homophobic, whatever, or I'm an enemy of the church because I'm gay and the gay agenda wants to take down the family. And I'm like, let's work through the anger and sadness, but can we come to a greater place of acceptance and actually have difficult discussions in the grief?
Christopher, this feels like an unfair question I'm about to ask, but I feel like it's a start. It's a way to like start to ask it. And if anybody knows me, they know that I'm pretty messy in my how I do life. Like I don't come very well thought out, which creates mess. But I feel like that's normal. Like that's real. I don't have everything pre-scripted and blah, blah, blah. So as you're talking, Christopher, the question I was asking myself was, how do I love Christopher and not compromise what I believe to be true? And that to me is, let's assume that that's the benefit. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt on both sides. So this is, to me, is the question of, how can I love you well and not compromise what I believe to be true? Now, again, that question is so unfair. I can imagine people freaking out as they're hearing this right now, like, what the blah, blah, blah. And I'm going, like, the freaking out isn't helpful. It's not helpful to the conversation. And I would say to anybody freaking out, like, what we're trying to do here is love well. Because if that's not the agenda, I don't know what the hell you're doing. But that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to love well and follow Jesus as closely as I can, because I believe he's got the corner on life. So those are my premises. And I don't have a problem reaching out to so asking you, Christopher, how can I love you well?
Yeah.
And the weird caveat is, and not compromise what I believe.
Yeah.
That's what's unfair.
Well,
is so
the freaking out.
I apologize for the
this
question.
Is great.
In a
No,
way,
it's great. The freaking out, again, these are turn of phrases that we use to go deeper on a spiritual level. I'll come back to the metaphor of, us emulating, whether it's Mary Magdalene or the Blessed Mother at the cross. The freaking out is the grief process. I think about Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ. Mary Magdalene was freaking. She was turning to people. What are you doing? You're crucifying, trying to change it, trying to stop it. You have to step. It's the natural grief process to freak out, right? Like, but and the other disciples went and hid. They were in denial. They ran away. Like that's part of the grief process. And Jesus loved them all, right? I mean, Peter's denial, right? Like trying to not go through the cross, versus Mary Magdalene is, I think, the model, right? Like Mary Magdalene invented the Stations of the Cross. So that's the first thing, is I want to affirm that freaking out is a natural part. But to your question of how to love me or how to sit in it, I guess I'll just sort of give a definition or a concept to let the listener sit with in Orthodox Catholicism. Those of you that very much disagree with me and agree with what the church has taught, there is a distinction between affirming me and accepting me. Affirming me is breaking with church teaching. I affirm your same-sex relationship. I will come to your wedding. I affirm this life. I celebrate this, right? That is what I call same-sex affirming. Accepting, to me, is the last stage of the grief process. I accept this loss. I don't know if I could change it. I'm going to work with you through it. I'm going to stay with you in it. I disagree with you. I think that this is going to bring you pain, and it could send you to hell by turning from God. But I've come to a place of acceptance that God could change that, and me working through my anger or bargaining or fighting this or battling this or trying to convince you. I appreciate the people in my life that very much disagree, that are a lot of pain, but that have accepted that they're not going to sort of change me. Now, I know that's hard, because you're like, no, I want to bring you back to the church. Well, again, let's zoom out of the homosexuality debate into many other areas where we have coworkers that are Protestant, right? Like evangelizing the entire world, getting them into full communion with the church. All of the people in politics that we think are voting in such a way or living in such a way that's in mortal sin. We deal with this every day. We just don't let it. I don't know. I feel like the homosexuality debate is just so anger and sadness filled in a way that others we found a way to be more, modest about and accepting. So can people accept me even if they don't affirm me?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll have to sit with that and just see how that's new for me to hear. I appreciate the insight.
Yeah. I feel like that was a good description. I felt, Christopher, because that's, I think, where we are with each other. I'm not affirming of your engagement or your wedding, or I can't be present as much as I would love to be a support to you. I can't be present to participate in your wedding. But at the same time, I love you and I accept you, and I live in the grief with you, just as you live in the grief with me. I think over this period of time, part of the reason why I was able to reach out is because I went through that grieving process that you're describing. And I think you have also, in relation to me, in relation to the ministry at some level. And so there is an acceptance of you and a love for you, and this rift that's just a difference. It's like, as we go down through the Catechism, as you were reading it, we would agree very much in the parts that you read, but the parts that we didn't emphasize are places of probably real disagreement, like intrinsically disordered, and there is no, this cannot be accepted. You want to comment on some of those and just the experience of those?
Yeah, great question, Bob. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Catechism 2358. The number of men and women who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies is not negligible. This inclination, which is objectively disordered, constitute for most of them a trial. There are other comments about sort of disorder and the sin around it. But I think that objectively disordered, and then there's another term, intrinsically disordered. And for me, I hear that as a philosophical statement of truth. Relations between men is not naturally ordered. It's not ordered to natural law because it's not open to the gift of life, because it's not, it doesn't represent the complementarity of spouses, which the Catholic Church believes to be God's design. And while I understand the importance of that statement of truth as a philosophical statement, this is wrong, it also is helpful for me to understand this is wrong in the way that many other disordered acts are wrong. Masturbation, pornography, using people of the same or opposite sex. I understand that when we're talking about homosexual, there is a deeper disorder that the Catholic Church argues because it is not complementary of spouses and it goes against natural law in a way that, I don't know, pornography between a man and a woman is unnatural, but it's less unnatural in some ways. So this is a philosophical debate, but I'll just bring it home and try to make it as personal as possible. Of what is damaging is when the pastoral approach begins to treat me, or I experience that I am treated with less dignity than other people. And so that really hit close to home, because I would never come into a Catholic church holding the hand of my fiance, my soon-to-be husband. Because if I come into church and show any form of PDA, I feel like I would cause a grave amount of scandal to other people, which would be very hurtful to me as well, in a way that if a couple that was cohabitating walked into church and people knew that they were cohabitating before marriage, or an unwed mother, or any other sort of sexual sin that people know about, the church will say that's wrong, but I will say on the ground level, the pastoral approaches and the way that the body of Christ embraces those people is very different. And I think that's where the Catechism calls us to respect compassion and sensitivity, calls us away from discrimination. But in our fallen human nature, I think because of politics, going back to the anger and the sadness around the sort of quote unquote gay debate, it becomes, very challenging. And that's where I think a lot of hurt comes in.
Hmm. Christopher, I just want to, you make a subtle reference to something I think is really important, and that's a philosophical discussion versus a pastoral discussion. And a synonym to me of pastoral discussion would be a discussion that isn't necessarily at the moment about objective truth, let's say. And objective truth always has to be applied to a person. And so to me, in the long version of a relationship with someone, there's time and place to have the philosophical discussions, and there's time and place to have the relational pastoral discussions. And it doesn't mean you have to contradict yourself. It's basically, if you have a 10-hour conversation, which I would highly recommend, is, like a 20-minute conversation with someone about this is just doing a disservice to the person, right? Because it's just a big issue. Like, there's nothing small there. That's all. These dynamics are deep, right? And the grieving that we were referencing earlier, goes very deep for people. The pain and we could say on both sides, it goes very deep. So the nuance I feel like we're making right now is we currently are emphasizing a pastoral discussion while we're touching right now on philosophical tones and dimensions. What you just said about accepting versus affirming, it feels like we're in that same genre, or we're taking various concepts and we're kind of putting them all together at the same time. And this is maybe where it gets really delicate, because the difference between affirming something, where if I affirm something that is I would argue, not objectively true or intrinsically disordered, that's where it starts to get, you have to be careful about the pastoral tones. Because I don't know about you, Christopher, and you're one person and people have very different experiences, so I don't want to generalize this, but my hunch is, I'm going to say something you typically don't say to people, because that's kind of what we're doing. Like, let's say I'm trying to convert you. Like, I'm trying to show you the way back to truth. it seems to me a really poor way to do that would be to go, Christopher, do you not realize that your actions are intrinsically disordered? Because what I just heard you say is, I know the argument. I know what you're saying. I can quote it. I even know in the Catechism where it is. And so I think that nuance is really interesting because in my experience, there seems to be this position that people have to go, but don't you know? Like, Christopher, don't you know it's intrinsically disordered? And I heard you just say, yes, I know that argument. You might not necessarily philosophically agree with it, but I'm hearing you say, that's nothing new to me. But at the same time, I'm hearing you say between the lines, that's a really poor way to relate to me if you're actually trying to care for me, is to smack me with the intrinsically disordered upside my head and then go, ready to get better, ready to be better. So I'll pause there. Like, maybe that was a bit choppy what I said, but does that resonate at all with what I'm saying, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll put it to Bob here in a minute for his comments on this, because the very human experience of this debate, so to speak, is real for me. Whenever I am hearing Bob's voice, a familiar voice, someone I've known for probably over almost a decade, if not probably over a decade, and getting to know you, Jake, it's virtual, but we're face to face. When I'm not talking with you all and I'm listening to the other 4 episodes, my politics debate hat is on and I'm dealing with anger and sadness, and I'm taking notes and I'm ready to get on this podcast and we're going to get in the arena and duke it out. And then as soon as we get on and I hear your voices and I see your faces, I'm like, that is not how this is going to go, because I know them. I'm in relationship with them, right? Another very real example is I'm getting married. My parents are excited. They're sort of on this sort of side of the debate. My mom invited my uncle. On one hand, I appreciate that my mom invited my uncle because it means that my mom sort of is excited. On the other hand, it filled me with anxiety because I'm like, I don't know where my uncle stands on this issue. And my mom's like, oh, my mom has this sort of pride. And she said, oh, he's accepting, yada, yada. And I was like, okay, so I'm debating, do I write an invitation? I don't know where he stands on this, but he seems to be accepting of me. And then today I saw what I experienced as very hurtful social media post that he had, a political post about LGBTQ, gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans issues that was very curt, very sort of chummy, very in that political tone. And it just like, it cut me to the core. So that would be the other example. So our conversation, I think, is the ideal. My mom trying to have a conversation with an uncle, to me, is sort of in the middle, but it shows that anxiety. And then what he posts on Facebook is like bottom of the barrel, Right. So do I invite him? If he got together with me and we were face to face, it probably would have this sense of tone and love and right. Like, because Christ is present where 2 or more, but Christ is not present where 2 or more are gathered on Facebook. I'm sorry. That is not an in-person thing.
Let's do an exegesis about that. Yeah.
So, and I'm sure Bob has all kinds of comments in line with this of like, this is what the philosophical statement is, but this is not what we mean by this, even though people experience that hurt within it.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the places in the church where there's been a lot of controversy. I think Father James Martin objecting to that phrase in the Catechism because he feels like it's betraying the dignity of each individual person. Whereas I think it's helpful to understand where the church is coming from. The church, who upholds the dignity of every person and quotes it in the Catechism, is saying just what you said, Christopher, which is that Romans 1, that men have gone against the natural law of men with women and men with men and women with women. And, just even in the gospel today, or the reading today, the morning's mass, as we're doing this podcast, is, the 1 Corinthians 6 and talking about this is all disordered, and it's listing homosexual acts along with adultery and along with fornication. So the church isn't saying, in terms of its doctrine, that this is a grave sin and these other things aren't grave sins. They're saying all of these things are grave sins. But as you just described, they're more or less ordered to the natural law. And so that intrinsic disorder is describing that. So I think you expressed it very well, Christopher, and I didn't have any objection. And you're right. There is a place where there would be more of a visceral reaction to two men coming in kissing or two women coming in kissing than there would be for a man and a woman who are in a cohabiting relationship coming in kissing, or two divorced and remarried people outside of the church coming in and kissing. And is that because of culture, or is that because of a sense of feels more disordered emotionally? Those are really good questions. But I hear that on your side, the experience of that is this way that the church may make a statement that seems to regard to dignity, but in practice, we don't treat you with the same kind of dignity in that kind of an experience.
Yeah, I think the three of us, is this rarely have I ever had a conversation like this. This is kind of the gold standard. If my partner and I were having a personal display of affection, holding hands, hugging, kissing, and Bob were to approach us or see us, Bob, I think you would have grief, right? Like, again, I always go back to these stages of grief, but you're in that place of acceptance where there might be potentially some sort of righteous anger at sin, but definitely sadness. But you're at that place of acceptance where you're like, by me swooping in and sort of spewing my anger and sadness on them, that's not going to be helpful. I think that it's sort of, we're talking about the three of us. And then I think what often happens to people, or you could say my people, the gay community, is more of that anger and sadness and that loving approach that holds the grief, right? That might be deeply grieved by it, but is willing to encounter and to go into that in a way that Christ did, right? Like in a way that Christ encountered people that he saw were in sin.
If I can add to this, and just if I'm honest with my emotion there, it's if I see a man who loves you, some of your best friends hugging you and just expressing, it's so good to see you, Christopher. There's delight there. There's a sense of, there's real love being expressed from my vantage point. But if I were to see you kissing a man in that way that's more erotic, there would be a natural level of revulsion in me. Mm-hmm. And not because I don't want you to have joy or don't want you to have masculine love, but that there's something in that intrinsically, whether that's conditioning or innate or spiritual, I don't know, but it's just a natural reaction. And I have that reaction in any place where I have a sense that there's something that's violating. I would have that reaction with somebody kissing a woman that they're having adultery with, or I would have that reaction with somebody looking at pornography. And even though I understand at some level what they're looking for, I don't have revulsion for that person, but I have it for the act. Mm-hmm. There's this intrinsic response to the act. And so sometimes those things then get communicated as rejection. And as we're sitting here talking, I don't mean it as any kind of rejection of you as a person, but just in terms of honest internal response to that.
Yeah. And I think for me, again, representing the community and the people in the world who have, said the church has been rejecting, the church has been hurtful, the church has been bigoted, the church has been homophobic. I don't think we're talking about this discussion. Right. And I think that's an important designation, is the way that you and I are talking respectfully. You've journeyed with me for so long and we know each other, Bob. I've met your entire family and you probably know much about mine from what I've shared with you. And so I think because we're in such close relationship, it has created a sort of safety around that. I like that we sort of talked about sort of even where we disagree in the very practicals, because what is important for me is here we are in the arena. I'm in the arena now. When I look at the two of you across the screen and I say, the practices and approaches to try to experience healing in my sexuality and integration, I would define that as these terms that maybe come off as hurtful or sort of hyperbolic: conversion therapy and pray the gay away. What I'm not saying is that you're being bigoted. What I'm not saying is that you're being homophobic. I think that's that important distinction, that oftentimes whenever we really get into the disagreement around this, it's shrouded in all of that other hurt and all of that pain. And we're still in that pain. But I think that's kind of where I'm curious if we could take the conversation of sort of talking about ways that I don't feel like Bob Schutz or any of the other folks in the community sort of hurt me in terms of this willful, but I would say that because of what I have experienced as things that were ineffective in my life and led me to sort of act or seek in a certain way, it became like I experienced harm. And so it's almost like communal sin, right? Like we could look at consumerism. Pope Francis will speak of consumerism or harm to the environment, or we debate ideas like just war. Like these are situations in which there's systems or approaches or communities that are trying their best to love and bring justice and make the world a better place, but people are hurt. So rather than finger pointing and saying, you, this hurt me, I could talk about experiences that I've had that I have found, speaking for myself. And it very much is in disagreement with, Hilde and AJ and Andy, like my three predecessors on here. But I get the sense of that's sort of why I was invited. These are three people before me, AJ, Andy, and Hilde, who feel like they experienced integration and healing and freedom because of this. And I'm someone who did not. But not saying that in a finger pointing, sort of you're hateful, you're bigoted kind of way. But in a way that I want to make an argument that says, sort of even just posits the question, is this what the Catechism is asking for? Right? Not that I want to throw the Catechism or debate it and say the Catechism should change like James Martin, but just to sort of have a sort of lively discussion about some of those things and then really get your commentary on them if that seems okay. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it, just to draw it out. When you use the word harm, that has a strong message. I could accept that there were things that you look back on and were adverse to based on the direction you went. But I'd like to hear how you felt harmed and what those experiences were, what those beliefs were that were communicated that seemed harming to you.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. And the first thing, and even giving context to the idea of harm, loving parents, right? Love their kids, but because of imperfection, their kids experience harm and hurt, and there's forgiveness and there's reconciliation. I think what's challenging in the harm is it's something where we're in disagreement of whether or not it was a mistake, if that kind of makes sense of like, have I misinterpreted? I feel like maybe I've been harmed, but it's also because I disagree with the methodology versus a parent who's just trying to love their kid who makes a mistake and is able to say, I made a mistake, please forgive me. In both situations, I know that you love me and I know that the parent loves me, right? But in one situation, the parent is like, I made a mistake here. And in the other one, I think because we have such disagreements on church teaching and different things. So all that being said, Jake, you had asked me before to clarify, and I think it's important. I had mentioned in passing that I had spent $50,000 between the ages of 25 and 30 on seeking healing of my sexuality. Mm-hmm. And to dive deeper on that, there's a debate about what conversion therapy is. Conversion therapy could be defined, I don't define it as this, is sort of converting to manipulating your will. Something that is not consensual, something that goes against the therapeutic approach, something that is pushy, something, Andy used the word lasso. We're not lassoing anybody in here. That metaphor of sort of lassoing people and pulling them in. I think for me, I would define it as anything that has sort of reorientation, sexual orientation, that my desires would be shifted in such a way as a primary outcome or as a significant outcome. And it doesn't have to be non-consensual. And I very much want to say, I think we just disagree on those terms, and I think that's okay. But I would like to continue the sort of the argument here. The $50,000 that I spent as a consenting adult, I very much went all in on this as a consenting adult. Nobody violated my consent. I didn't ever feel manipulated in any way. So the harm that I experienced was not this form of manipulation or this pushiness. And I bring up the 50,000. I love mental health, right? I still go to regular counseling. I almost went into school to become a counselor a couple months back. The nonprofits I work for are in recovery and mental health. And actually, in a lot of ways, Dr. Bob's organization and the work you've done, Dr. Bob, and a lot of that, I think, really helped plant those seeds, because I experienced so much healing and so much integration because of family trauma, right? So there's a lot that I count as good that I gained, but it was always this hope that, okay, once I receive healing from whether it be sexual abuse or verbal abuse or a failure of intimacy with my same-sex parent, with my dad, or enmeshment with my mom. A lot of these things that many people experience. You had mentioned before that like the path to same-sex attraction healing and opposite sex attraction healing is the same path of healing. And in the vein of that approach, like there's a lot of things that I experienced as healing, but my orientations have never shifted. They've never lessened. And I know that my predecessors in the podcast might sort of say that in passing. They'll say it as an afterthought. I mostly heard it as sort of secondary, like, oh yeah, well, they still remain, but I want to put a big magnifying glass on my experience and the experience of hundreds of people that I know that I've met and thousands of people that I know of, that like, it's not a secondary thing like, oh, well, my attractions haven't really changed, but I've been able to integrate. It's like, no, they're still very, very, very much here. And when I invest that much time and that much money over a decade with this hope that it will change and it doesn't change, I begin to feel like maybe I'm crazy. There's this immense amount of self-doubt for those of us that experience same-sex attraction, that other people that don't experience that. And I would say that's a big difference in the way the healing journeys are very different, is the amount of self-doubt that I've had to grapple with, that I still grapple with in preparation for this podcast, of like, am I a Christian? Like, am I crazy? Like, I'm literally, as I'm out loud sort of saying this, like, it's an intense amount of self-doubt. And I don't know anybody else that doesn't share the same experience with me around sexuality, other than those of us that sort of haven't been able to reintegrate our sexual desires. And so that, I hope I'm sort of making sense here, but like, there's a whole group of friends that I talk with almost daily. Most of us were gay men. We were in seminary. We either were in seminary, we discerned seminary. A lot of us served as missionaries. One of my closest friends served as a priest. And I mention this as a way of saying all of us were deeply devoted to the Catholic faith, and we're all in terms of ministry and healing. And it's 5 of us. And I would never say by name because I don't want to out us, but these are some of my closest friends. And we're at least 5 people who really grapple with this almost daily in our group texts and our Zoom conversations, of experiences that we've had where we desperately sought a reintegration and healing and felt like we did everything we could. And the attractions didn't lessen, they didn't change, they didn't shift. And in one instance, my friend, he was at a weekend retreat, and he said he was sitting in a circle, and the leader of the retreat, in hopes to heal his same-sex attraction, made him point out another person that he was attracted to and what he was jealous of in that person. Right. So he politely mentioned, I'm not jealous of anybody here. I'm not jealous of any man or any trait that they have. But it became an argument with my friend and the leader of, yes, you are. Like, by definition, you are. And sort of pressured him. And eventually he like did not want to debate the leader or seem disobedient on the weekend. So he just picked somebody with long hair, and he said, I'm jealous of his long hair, because there's this idea that, we've gotten into this debate where, behind every unholy desire is an unmet need, right? So if you're jealous of, if I as a man am jealous of something in another man, that could become eroticized. And if I'm eroticizing, or if I'm attracted to a feature in another man, it's because I might have an unmet need. So that unholy desire is from an unmet need. And I know that that's an approach, but that is an example of an approach that was harmful for me, because I don't have a lack of confidence in my masculinity anymore. I don't have body issues. My type, who I'm attracted to, sort of like, another psychological term of my type, or who I'm attracted to, is my arousal template. The things I'm attracted to in another man is not really related to what I don't like in myself. I mean, there is a vast proportion of the gay population who like the people that are actually very similar to them, right? Who are attracted. So the sort of the pathological approach to say, okay, you like something in another man, it's because of a lacking in you. That was very much a theme of the first 3 episodes. And I get that might be true for those 3 people, but I don't think that's what the Catechism asks for. I would argue that the Catechism says homosexuality refers to relations between men and women who experience an exclusive or predominant attraction. It says it has taken a great variety of forms through the centuries and to different cultures. So I think the Catechism is pointing out this is very varied. It's taken a great variety of forms, right? And then it says, clear as day, its psychological genesis remains largely unexplained. Now, I know it's our job as a church to discern that, and I know that the Catechism might eventually write something that says we have found the psychological genesis, but the Catechism says its genesis remains largely unexplained, right? Its psychological genesis remains largely unexplained. I would argue that what is hurtful and harmful is that much of my time and energy and money and devotion to Christian discipleship and following the Lord was very enmeshed with a psychological genesis to explain my same-sex attraction. And to me, that is the definition for me of conversion therapy. Not that it's manipulative, not that it's coercive, it's hurtful because I think it is trying to take a step beyond what the Catechism does. And I understand that we're the church and we're journeying in that, but I'm here as a member of the church, as baptized Catholics, just like you all, to say, I defend that statement in the church, and I know I'm in disagreement with other Catholics in that.
Christopher, I appreciate there's a lot that you're saying, and there's a lot of different nuances and dynamics there. Listeners, I just want you to pause for a moment and notice what all is coming up for you, because those dynamics are very important, because we're having a conversation, we're looking at each other, we're giving each other space, attention, etc. And what a podcast allows is you're sitting in your car or you're doing the dishes, whatever, wherever you listen to podcasts, and you're being influenced and impacted. And so I just want to invite you to pause and be self-aware about the various movements of your heart and how you're reacting. I think it could go all the way from, finally, somebody's saying it. Thank you, Christopher. Finally, to this guy's the most ridiculous guy. Why the hell are they having him on this show? This is the stupidest thing I hate. Because that's what a podcast allows you. Now, there's a difference between that experience and sitting here with you, Christopher. You've alluded to that this whole way along, right? You listen to the other episodes and we're like having your emotional reactions in your house and like, this is ridiculous, taking notes, etc., which is a different thing than sitting and having a real conversation with people. And so I feel like part of what I'm trying to do in these episodes is to be present, but also show people that you can have conversations about things and disagree. That to me is what I feel like I might be pulling away a little bit, Christopher, but I don't want to pull away from what you're saying. I want to come right back to it in a second, but I feel like I want to attend to the listenership a little bit. Everybody has people in their life that you disagree with the actions that they do or don't do. How you engage with them makes a world of difference. And that to me is what is healing. So I'll just say that, Christopher, one of the things that was in a healing component or dimension or whatever, like therapy, one of the things that you were negatively influenced by, one of the things that hurt you was the impression, and because I'm not hearing you say that it was explicitly stated to you, but the impression, maybe it was explicitly stated, that the psychological genesis of your same-sex attraction is known and I'm going after it. And if we fix that, then you will no longer be same-sex attracted. That's what I think I'm hearing you say.
I would say that, but I would disagree with I'm going after it. I would say the first 3 episodes is a psychological genesis as an explanation for same-sex attraction. So I want to stay away from I'm going after it. Quoting me is quoting you. So
I mean, the therapist. I mean, the therapist would have that phrase of, "Oh, I know your psychological genesis. It came from this thing that happened when you were 5 years old. So now I'm going to go after that wound, and that'll fix all your problems." That's what I meant by going after it, not that you are going after it.
And I never heard that statement in all of So
right.
I think that's a hypothetical statement, and I just want to make it very real that that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I'm just the 4th person in a podcast disagreeing and making a statement that I want to argue about, that the first 3 guests that preceded me went against the Catechism because they all gave a psychological genesis and an explanation for their same-sex attraction. And that's what I am here to debate.
Yeah. And you said at the same time that could be their experience, and that's where you're allowing you're allowing room for them to have your experience. But what you're saying is that isn't necessarily my experience.
Yeah. In support of theirs, I would go back to the Catechism quote that, like, you know, it mentioned, sorry, I'm going in and out because I really want to make sure last thing I want to do is quote the Catechism wrong, right?
Sure.
It says, homosexuality, it has taken a great variety of forms through the centuries and to different cultures. So I don't mean to say I want to retract a little bit. I don't want to say, I don't want to invalidate the 3 folks that preceded me, right? I don't want to invalidate any of their experience or any of their healing as invalid. I want to say that that approach for everyone, I think, goes against the Catechism talking about the diversity of sexual experience and the psychological genesis remaining unexplained. I think so for some folks, if they want to explain it that way and they want to own that, they can. I tried to own it for a decade. I could have written a book on it. I could have easily been one of the first 3 guests in this podcast. I think I would have if I were still involved in the ministry. I mean, I could have articulated very well. I'm disagreeing with the approach that the 3 individuals is the experience for everyone. And that's why I'm so grateful that we're having such a challenging discussion, that you brought me on here as the 4th guest to follow the 3 to say, wait, hold on, it didn't work for me and it didn't work for a lot of other people. Not to say that you intentionally harmed or hurt or coerced or manipulated or over-explained, but just that a model that worked for some didn't work for me. And I think that the verdict is still out on the church if that model is helpful. And there are people that are orthodox, that believe the Catholic Church teaching on homosexuality being intrinsically disordered, that actually still disagree with that approach. And I think that's what we're teasing at, is these different camps.
Yeah. First of all, I appreciate you laying all that out. We haven't had this discussion before, so it's really good. I've heard you talk about it, but not us having the discussion. So just first, that's the first thing. And I wanted to wait a minute because there were several defensive responses that were coming up inside of my heart. And I was just trying to sort what was a response out of self-protection and what was a response out of wanting to communicate a truth and a reality related to that. So let me just do the best I can, and you can sort out.
So just real quick, listeners, what Bob just did is essential for these conversations. We can come back to that in a second. Sorting out defensiveness versus truth. Anyway, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, and I think you alluded to some of it. I mean, there was nothing, we spent probably in all of our conferences that you were attending, maybe a total of a half hour out of however many hours talking about healing on the issue of genesis of same-sex attraction. And in that, we talked about lots of different possibilities: sexual abuse, relationship, envy of another person's body. I would include all that in the diversity, not as a uniform statement. Each of the 3 people that we interviewed would all talk about different psychological genesis in their own life as they were on that journey and discovering. And I think, if you've said it before in other contexts, that a lot of the psychological genesis that we identify, you could identify in your own life also. But what I hear you objecting to is, as you went on that and invested yourself and were really hopeful in that, your desires didn't lessen. They're just as strong as they ever were. I would say what's changed is that they're more out in the open now, and that feels freeing to you from what I've heard you say. Rather than trying to overcome them, you've accepted them and acted on them and chosen your life on them. And for you, that feels like a freedom rather than anything negative. And so as you came out in that way, I hear you saying that you then look back at those 10 years and say, I was trying to go against, quote unquote, my nature. And all of this that I've been involved with John Paul II Healing Center and the theology of the body and, the healing climate in the church was leading me in a direction that I bought into, and then I felt it failed me. Is that a safe way of saying that?
Yeah, I would say that the outcome that I sought, that I was pastorally given, did not come. And that is an outcome that maybe could be defended, that it did. That's not explicitly what we planted in you, but I would think it was 1,000 seeds that have been planted. And I could make my own podcast, and one day, I could do a research project on where a lot of those seeds come from. And we don't have time in the podcast for me to sort of read, an example of quotes that I already have of many seeds that were planted. But it's easy to sort of argue against what I'm proposing when we're able to put one example, sort of well, we didn't say this explicitly, but I think what I'm trying to say is there's a pastoral approach in the church that's 1,000 seeds being planted here or there as the church is sort of experimenting and trying to find out, okay, the church says that this is objectively disordered. The church says that this is intrinsic disorder and it's against natural law. So why is that? It's because of sin. It's because of brokenness. Why is that? And I think it's the seeds of 1,000 planting that happen in me. And I could point to many of them, but I would not point to one person and say, this person is not loving, this person is sort of set me on that path. It's the multiplicity, not the singular. So I think you're right to say, like, we only spent 3 minutes, and I would say that is a seed, and talking about certain psychological genesis, and then this other seed here and this other seed here. Another one we've talked about, sort of to talk about those seeds, is, I talked about the first one of the friend, like the sort of the jealousy, like I have something that I must be jealous of. I hear maybe you all saying, well, that doesn't have to be true. But another one is, behind every disordered desire is an ordered desire. My attempt in my life to have more and more male friendships to fill the void of male intimacy so that my same-sex attraction would lessen or integrate. And Andy, quoting Andy from Andy Comiskey, he said, this is Andy's experience. He said, the more I took the risk of friendship with men, the less I began to eroticize men. So that is Andy's experience. The more I took the risk of friendship with men, the less I began to eroticize men. I think what I am challenging is, it's very easy to take that, equate it with the Catechism, and glue them together because it makes sense and it's easy. I am one person of hundreds that says that is not my experience. I am the gay guy that was always friends with guys. I always had guys around me. I was never the emasculated gay that was only with women. And for me, once I really got involved with the church and different ministry organizations and missionary organizations, I was told, hold on, if you can just get more friendships with men, that same-sex attraction will lessen. That was my natural lane anyway, and it led for me to so much heartbreak, so much enmeshment, so many unhealthy friendships, which I think goes against the Catechism, because the Catechism calls people with same-sex attraction, it says, quote, by virtues of self-mastery that teach them, meaning me or people trying to seek the church, by virtues of self-mastery that teach them inner freedom, at the times by support of disinterested friendship, by prayer and sacramental grace. So that term disinterested friendship as a way of integrating your same-sex attraction. I definitely think that, like, having a good group of male and female friends to balance out my life is good. But I think that my desire to seek so many male friendships in this false hope that my same-sex attraction would lessen or integrate made my friendships very interested, not disinterested. It actually clouded my friendships for over a decade. Now that I have given up, so to speak, on the idea that my sexuality would sort of integrate or heal in that way, now I'm able to live disinterested friendship, because I'm able to say, you know what? I like that guy. He's cute. Dare I say, he's hot, right? In the same way, like, and I know that comes off as, kind of edgy, but I think my point is that now it doesn't immediately become a mirror back onto me to say, where does that come from? How does this find healing? Oh no, I could say, this is somebody I'm called to be friends with, or this is a stranger, or this is whoever. I'm called to value them. I'm called to love them. I'm called to not use them as an object, and I just let them go. And to me, that is the experience of most straight people. Most men, when they are attracted to the face of a woman, or the chest of a woman, or the bottom of a woman, like these parts of women, men are called to not covet, right? To not lust after, to see that these are parts of a woman and it's the whole, and you should look at their face and see that these are parts of a whole woman, and you're called to love and nurture and care and not act and not covet. There's not all these other questions of, oh my gosh, where did this come from? What parts of myself am I insecure in that I'm attracted to this part of this woman? How does it have to do with my mother issues or my sisters, or, because I was rejected by women? It's, okay, I'm attracted to this part of this woman, and I'm called to value her and love her and not covet and release this and see her as God's creation and not act out in lust about this. And I think that's a very big distinction. It's sort of another way of a seed that was planted that I am curious of your comments or your thoughts on.
Yeah, if I can just follow up, I want to get back to the psychological genesis and then come forward with that. When I hear that in the Catechism, I don't hear the Catechism saying there is no psychological genesis. It's just saying we're not in a place to make a determination of what the psychological, just like if we look at all the other sexual sins listed in the Catechism there, whether it's pedophilia or whether it's adultery or whether it's pornography, the Catechism wouldn't say we know definitively what the psychological genesis of each of those areas of sin are. And so I don't hear it as the Catechism saying there is no psychological genesis, or that the scientific community and the therapeutic community can't explore psychological genesis. I just hear that church saying this isn't our business to come up with a conclusion here about what the psychological genesis is. Just to be clear on that.
Mm-hmm.
And, as we've talked in your story, and I won't do this publicly, but as, we could have this as a private conversation. There are elements of your story that make sense to me in terms of your attractions and why that happened in relationships and all of that. And I think for you too, and I think that was part of the confusion, is that you could see yourself fitting into a lot of what was being talked about, and yet not experiencing the freedom from those attractions. In fact, accepting those attractions and desiring to live them out. Right? Is that a fair statement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sort of the story and the seeds that were sown took root very deep, right? Like I was someone who did have, a distant relationship with my father and was very, very close with my mother, right? And so the idea that could be an explanation, I did not experience that as a philosophical argument. This could be an explanation, but it doesn't have to. It was like, oh my gosh, that's it. That's it. And I took it as church teaching, even though what I hear you saying is that's not explicitly what the church teaches. This is us trying to seek healing for people and work through wounds.
This is any good therapist isn't trying to conclude what the other person's struggle is. It's helping to discover with the person. And so when we're doing a conference, we're just laying out possibilities, because we're not working individually with each person in the room, and each person in the room is experiencing different things. And I hear that about the seeds, and I can see that. And as your heart is really desiring then to live according to the church's teaching and the struggle with that, I can hear the pain in that. But I also know many men and women who have been had a pornography addiction, a pornography compulsion, and have invested a lot in their healing process, and come kind of with the same frustration as I don't have a freedom here after all this that I've invested in. And to me, it doesn't then say, well, then therefore just go and give yourself over to that particular area of sin. It's saying, okay, I hear that. I hear the pain. I hear the struggle, but it doesn't change the nature of the fact of the sexual act and how God designed it. And so that's where the place I would disagree with you. I would be totally with you in the struggle and totally with you in the despair that you feel in that struggle, and investing so much of yourself and desiring so much, and then coming up feeling bankrupt with it. There's just a lot of compassion for that. So that's not where there's any disagreement.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a sense of, as I said, the example with any other kind of what I would consider sexual compulsion. Maybe one of the things that would be offensive to you is that I consider same-sex attraction to be compulsive and not free.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a place probably that we disagree on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, we're sort of teasing out the nuances here in the arena metaphor. It's easy to stick with, and I don't want any listener to feel like I am here to sort of make folks question the catechism. That's not, to me, what the purpose of this debate is, to sort of like the James Martin, like we need to, well, James Martin has not explicitly said that the church should change its teaching, but let's be real. All of us know, okay, I'm someone who is engaged to be married, and James Martin fully supports that. He just hasn't said it out loud because he has a platform and he's trying to change his church teaching. I'm on that side. That is not what I'm trying to do in this podcast, is make anyone feel to sow their seeds of doubt and orthodoxy. I think I've brought up Eve Tushnet as somebody who I know that is sort of with me a little bit on this, and I know sort of probably in disagreement with you, Bob, or maybe the approach that Eve took. But to me, Eve is a person who represents a population of Catholics who identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, that have chosen to live celibacy, have chosen to obey the church teaching, have said God's design for humanity is not for me to act out on these same-sex desires. God's design is for me to remain celibate and live and carry that cross. It like it said in the Catechism, at times by disinterested friendship, by self-mastery, to try to progress towards Christian perfection. That is not something I am doing. But I almost wish that someone like her, or someone that's in the middle of us, what we had in this podcast is three folks who espoused, I think, one belief that you mostly share. And then you had me sort of on the farthest end. And I'm even trying to carve out a middle ground here of, is it possible to be Catholic, to obey the church's teaching, to agree with the Catechism, but to not seek healing in a way that I sought? And that's the sort of open question that I'm posing.
If I can jump in, I think is that, I'm not sure if I heard the last part right. If you were asking, Christopher, if that's possible or whatever, but that ground of, really, it sounds like we're revolving around the psychological genesis question and then making an attempt to answer that, and then that informs what you do, especially in a therapeutic context. What's the source of the problem, and how do you fix the problem? So I don't mean to be flippant with my language there, Christopher, but to put it very terse. Mm-hmm. Okay, what's the problem? Where did it come from? How do we make it better? And so I would contend there's a large space in the church for people who are trying to live out the catechism and don't experience healing of their same-sex attraction. There has to be space for that, because if there isn't space for that, then there's several ramifications that are gigantic. One, the people in Bob and I's sphere are like, what are we doing wrong that everyone's not getting better? That it can create that dynamic. And then I think that could make the therapeutic encounter worse, because we're operating out of fear and pressure instead of a trust and dependency on God. And two, like, just the journey of the soul is not like straight, and in the sense of everybody goes through the same thing and it happens the same way, and it's not like that at all. And if anybody's done pastoral ministry knows the uniqueness of each person is immense, and it makes it very hard to, you have to be really tailored with a lot of the stuff that you offer to people. So that middle ground of, I think that's really where the camp discussion is really rich, because I would say there are people who've experienced some level of healing and integration, and even that could be debated. So I'm being very intentional with my language there. Some level of healing integration. Some would say, I don't have any same-sex attraction anymore at all. Some people would even argue that and say that's not possible. But anyway, all the way to other places where people would say, I haven't experienced any integration of my sexual desire. And the camp that I think where Bob and I fall, and Christopher, I'm hearing you say you're not in this camp, which is really intriguing to me. And I don't mean intriguing to set you up. I'm very curious to hear about it. It's the camp of, I adhere to the church's teaching, because that's the camp I fall in. I adhere to the church's teaching. And so that room for various levels of integration, there's space for that, even to the point of no integration of sexual desire at all the way over to full integration of sexual desire, but a still adherence to the church's teaching. That's the camp I'm in. The psychological genesis, to me, I'm with the catechism there. I don't know the psychological genesis, and that's my position in the camp. I don't know the psychological genesis, so I have to be mindful of that when I'm doing various things. Bob, I would think that's even your position objectively, but you have a lot of subjective professional experiences that inform positions that you take. Bob, we could go down that route. But Christopher, could you just comment? I want to be sensitive to the question I'm asking, because this is probably just as difficult a journey, I would guess, if I'm understanding your heart, as it was to say, there's no hope anymore. I'm not going to get better, right? That must have been that's a gigantic thing. And that almost feels like a part two.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to adhere to the church's teaching anymore. Like, those feel big in your story.
Yeah. Everyone's experience is completely different, right? So you had my experience. I didn't quite come to a place of like hopelessness, despair.
Okay.
Also, a lot of people go on a journey. They go from the side of like, this could be healed. We're going to find, there's a psychological genesis. Like, there's some kind of brokenness in this life, this side of eternity, in my life since I was born, that caused this. There's roots of this that can be healed so I can integrate, right? There's that. And then there is, I am not seeking that, but I'm going to live the church's teaching, and I'm not going to answer that question. And that question cannot be answered. And I agree with church teaching. And then there's me. A lot of people go through those first three stages. I skipped from the first to the last. Right.
Oh,
I was all in, seeking. And then after falling in love enough times, I was tired of trying to find the explanation for it, and I just let it happen. Now, had there been space for me in the middle camp, had those seeds been sown, but though, I'm sorry, that was not my experience in the Theology of the Body Institute. That's not my experience in the Jump Alto Healing Center. That's not my experience in Tobit where I worked. That was not my experience in Andy Comiskey's approach. There was not the Eve Tushnet approach when I was an adolescent and when I was with Net Ministries and when I was with the TOR Franciscans at Steubenville. Other people might have found those approaches, but there were too many seeds sown in me where I was seeking healing so intently. And I think that's my challenge, is to make more space in the church for the unexplained. And I don't want to accuse Bob of having it all explained. Bob, what I think, Jake and Bob, is that there are degrees, right? Like, I'm not hearing Bob saying, I have it all explained, I have it all figured out. Jake, sometimes you've quoted that as if that's where the perspective is, like, I have it all figured out, I'm going to heal you. I don't think so. I think it's the Catechism says it remains unexplained. Then there's degrees of saying, well, the Catechism doesn't say it's fully explained or unexplained, but there are certain patterns, right? And then there are people that are even more sort of uncertain and don't even ask the questions. I think I was so intently in asking the questions and seeking with no space for the unexplained. And that's what I'm trying to do is bring out the Catechism to say, create more space for the unexplained. And as a theological context for that, doubt is the opposite of, to me, doubt is not the opposite of faith. When we're trying to seek answers, to me, doubt exists when there are not answers. I mean, literally, like, faith is in doubt. If you had doubt and faith are not opposites, because sometimes we think that, like, faith is the certainty and doubt is bad. It's the doubt. To me, faith is saying yes and choosing to follow in the midst of doubt. So in a certain sense, the greater the doubt, the greater the faith, because you're acting in the doubt. Like, I doubt, I don't know the answer to this, but I'm going to choose anyway. And to me, that those that have the most faith are the ones that have all of the unanswered questions, but still choose. And I think what we want to guard against is the certainty, or is the self-certainty, or the approach towards it, or the trying to figure out. The original sin in the Garden of Eden, it was lust, but it was also the knowledge of good and evil. It was, I think that, are we seeking knowledge too much in this area, this side of eternity, to try to receive that healing and integration? And that's sort of the argument I'm trying to make. I'm legitimately trying to sow doubt in the approaches that I was given, to say, can Christ come into that, walk with people, and help them journey following him?
You said something, I'm not sure if it sounds inconsistent with what you said before, which is seeking knowledge. Maybe I heard you wrong, but it sounds like you are saying seek knowledge, but do it carefully. And if you don't know, don't act like you know, and don't impose a theory that you don't know. So I could have heard you wrong, but you said don't seek knowledge, and I was like, that doesn't sound. Maybe I misheard you.
No, I'll grow up on that. Don't seek knowledge. I think what I mean is in our fervence to try to have full integration and healing this side of eternity, and our deep desire to be healed and to heal others, we seek knowledge to try to find the genesis of our brokenness.
Sure.
And in many ways, there's a clear path. And there's so many areas where our family of origin issues and abuse and different things have hurt us and harmed us. And in so many ways, me receiving healing in those areas helped integrate so many areas of my life. But the intense seeking of knowledge in this specific area of sexual orientation, I think that's the temptation, is to seek too much knowledge and too much explanation in that area. And we should back up, hear what the Catechism says about the unexplanation, and lean back on the side of mystery and wonder and the diversity of sexual experience as we try to hold the church teaching, or as you try to hold the church teaching. And I think Eve Tushnet and her orthodoxy, she's not heretical, but I would say she's almost heterodox in her approach of, can we agree with church teaching on natural law and the complementarity of spouses and openness to life without trying to seek a psychological genesis for healing in our sexuality?
Yeah. But I think what the Catechism would say with some level is that we're all to seek chastity, which is integration, right? We all three agree with that. And that integration is self-mastery. And so whether we're in heterosexual love or same-sex love, I think there's a wisdom to the church's teaching about that integration happening in our hearts to the point where we're not acting compulsively in our sexuality, but we have a freedom to say no. And so why, again, you brought up the issue of couples living together, and why does that seem more acceptable? To me, it's not more acceptable. Even though it's so prevalent, I think for a successful relationship, self-mastery is key, because whatever ways we're operating in compulsiveness, and we all have areas of compulsiveness, lack of integration, those areas are going to keep us from having self-giving love. And to me, that's the developmental stages, is to grow from that kind of erotic attraction that we don't have self-mastery with, to a kind of self-mastery in that erotic attraction, so that we can make a gift of ourselves and be generative, is, I think, what the church is teaching about sexuality is. And so it's not, beyond the different camps. I think that's something that the Catechism is really clear about across any kind of sexual orientation or sin or compulsion.
I want to be conscious of the listeners, because for a moment there I forgot, like I was on a Zoom call with two other men. So I was like, okay, right, we're recording a podcast here. So we could go on and on and on about this. And I think the discussion is very fruitful. So I'm not sure, because I'm a bit disconnected from the overall flow of the whole conversation, because I'm almost too present to what we're talking about right now. So maybe this is technical. I don't even know. This is very intriguing to me where we are right now, because we're splitting hairs. Maybe I don't think we are, but maybe some people would perceive it that way. This feels very important because it informs all kinds of things that are that are part of our everyday lives. So, Christopher, how you live your everyday life, how I live my everyday life, how I operate as someone who offers psychological healing to people. So this whole psychological genesis discussion is extremely important. And we could go on and on and on. And I just want to acknowledge that there's probably people who are listening who probably know, I'll speak for myself, 1,000,000 times more than I do about all of this stuff, and have gone, I've figured out the psychological genesis. Like, well, I'd love to hear what you figured out. But I think the thing that we're talking about is the sensitivity that's required when you're engaging in a relationship with someone. It requires care, not flippancy. And if I could do a generic summary, I'm hearing you, Christopher, say it was hard because I felt like I was misled. And Bob, I know you very well, and that's the last thing that you would want to do. And you guys could probably keep breaking that down and saying, well, that isn't what I said, and that is what I said. But I think I want to just highlight the overall care with which we're trying to have this conversation. And it's easy to listen to the podcast and then go and get upset and go, well, why didn't they say this? Why didn't they say that? Where my position is my hope from this episode with you, Christopher, is that people could reconsider how they engage in difficult conversations with people and try to do it carefully, caringly, and not compromising the position that you have. And I admire that the three of us could even get in the arena, Christopher, to piggyback off the analogy, and do that. And I would easily have a coffee or a beer with any one of you. And I'm not so bothered or offended that I can't speak to you anymore. And yet we still maintain disagreement.
Yeah.
And so that to me is good and unique. And
yeah, what's on my heart is that, like, we're landing this plane feeling incomplete. And to me, there's doubt because we're in disagreement, right? And I've sort of sowed doubt of, like, I've sowed questions. We're left with doubt. We're left with grief and sadness, right? And we're left in disagreement. And so those doubt, sadness, and disagreement. And I think that, doubt, grief, and disagreement. I think faith, hope, and love, like that, like that's what we pray for, is that, like, faith in the midst of this doubt, certainly hope, right? Like, I know we each hold hope in a different way. But I think most of all, the greatest is, like, we're still here loving each other. I've never felt unloved. And I certainly hope that even in our doubt and disagreement, you all haven't felt unloved. And so it's hard to end like this, but that's where I just put those three as a prayer: faith, hope, and love.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I don't have a lot more to say, but just gratitude, Christopher, for you coming on, and your courage. I want to use that word to really engage this with us. And I felt like you expressed yourself very charitably and with a lot of consideration. And so I'm just grateful. And I pray that this will not only bless each of us as we go forward, but a lot of other people who are listening.
Yeah.
Amen.
We can go back to our camps and said that we all came to a camp out together and we just made our own camp. We just tented up. We the three of us on the top of the mountain. We can't stay here forever, but we set up our camp on this mountain, and it was short and sweet, and we ascended, and now we have to go back down, and we did it. I experienced love from you all and just really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thanks, Christopher. Thanks for coming on. Listeners, we hope this blesses you. We look forward to talking to you again soon.